So one of the biggest questions when it comes to weaving something is, what set should we use? Which reed should we use? And I think the answer is actually, it really depends. Welcome to the Sweet Georgia Weaving Channel. I am Felicia from Sweet Georgia Yarns and the School of Sweet Georgia, and today I want to talk about choosing a set for your weaving project. Now, this question came up recently because we started doing a weave-along in November called the Winterful Weave-Along, and we were weaving something called the Kaleidoscope Scarf. It is a log cabin color and weave scarf that is being woven in plain weave. You can weave it on a rigid head loom or a multi-shaft loom. It's basically just plain weave. Now, the pattern that Amanda Wood wrote for this weave-along is set at 12.5 ends per inch, and that's because she was using a Ashford rigid head loom, and Ashford produces a 12.5 dent reed, and so that's what we decided to use for the pattern. And so many of the weavers who were joining the weave-along were wondering, well, if I don't have a 12.5 dent reed, can I use a 12 dent reed? Can I use a 10 dent reed? Could I use an 8 dent reed? And the answer is, it really all depends. And so what I always encourage everybody to do is to sample. Now I'm going to show you a number of different projects that were all woven with pretty much the same warp yarn. It's a fingering weight yarn. We're using sort of a fingering weight knitting yarn. It's our Tough Love sock yarn. And in some cases, we have some BFL and silk fine yarn. So they're all fingering weight knitting yarns that we're using for warp generally. And I have set them in all of these projects anywhere from 10 ends per inch to 12 ends per inch to 15 ends per inch to 20 ends per inch. And they all produce slightly different fabric. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of my thought process behind these projects and how I use one project to sort of inform the next project. As with all of my weaving, basically the thing that you've woven becomes the sample for the next thing that you're going to weave. And you're just learning so much from each one of these items as they come off the loom. So one of the very first things that we wove in the School of Sweet Georgia is this. This is a color gamp project, and it was meant to teach optical mixing, right? Looking at how all of these colors mix and blend in plain weave. So this one happened to be woven on a shacked baby wolf loom, and I set this at 10 ends per inch. So if you look at the pattern, you can get the pattern in the School of Sweet Georgia, and this one was set at 10 ends per inch with this fingering weight yarn in plain weave. Now, I found after I wove this project that, yes, the drape is fantastic. Yes, it feels really nice and soft and luscious, but I felt like maybe the fabric was just the tiniest bit sleazy. Sleazy meaning like the structure of the yarn is not like ideal and not necessarily strong enough. And so the test of this is always if you can poke a finger through your fabric. And so you can see here, I can poke a tiny little finger through the fabric. If I pushed harder, then I could do that more. And so part of the reason is because this yarn is treated so that it doesn't felt. And so it doesn't full or sort of bind together, connect together in that same way. Otherwise, if you used a non-superwash yarn for a project like this, it should full and blend together really nicely. So this is basically 10 ends per inch. So knowing that 10 ends per inch with the Tough Love sock was a little bit less firm than I would like, then I started to make a whole bunch of projects that were set at 12 ends per inch. And so these are all projects that are, again, woven with Tough Love sock. This is in terms of a gradient sock blank. I chopped it up and made this project. So this is a gradient sock blank. Again, fingering weight, sort of Tough Love sock, knitting yarn, sock yarn kind of weight, and then wove this one, plain weave, at 12 ends per inch. Okay, so 12 ends per inch, this is significantly more firm. It is not going to have a problem with being able to poke your finger through it or anything like that. It is a little bit more crisp feeling than something that is like more buttery soft like this. And so sometimes I wish that they could just get 11 ends per inch for this exact yarn. That would be ideal, but given those two options, I kind of want to go with something that's a little bit more structurally sound. So that is 12 ends per inch. This one's also 12. This is another gradient sock blank. This is a gradient sock blank that's a little bit more splashy, and so therefore that's why you're seeing some of these colors the way they are. But this is some of my favorite stuff, is just seeing all of the colors mix and blend in something like this. Yes, this is another one. This is another one that was woven in the hand woven color class about gradient sock blanks for the School of Sweet Georgia. And again, 12 ends per inch. And this one is producing like quite a nice, quite a nice drape and a nice weight to it. Again, this one turned out really, really great. So this was from the class called Sock Blank Scarves, and we did sock blank scarves in a number of different ways. And so this is just one of the projects. This is 12 ends per inch woven in plain weave. And then using, again, sock blank scarves, this one is buttery soft. This one is incredibly soft. It is the same set, so same 12 ends per inch, with the same yarn. It's a gradient sock blank yarn, but then the difference is that we used merino silk lace as the weft. So rather than using the same yarn, the sock blank yarn, for the weft, we chose to use a lace weight yarn. So the fact that it's a thinner yarn, it helps to produce a much more drippy, drapey, sort of slinky kind of fabric. And again, this one is actually quite nice. It is still pretty structurally sound. But again, if this is not sound enough for you, then you might want to go up in terms of set. So this is another scarf that I wove. Again, this is set at 12 ends per inch, but this is my hand spun as warp. And so my hand spun, turns out it was a little bit thinner than fingering weight yarn. And so you can see it is very drippy and very drapey and very slinky, very soft kind of fabric. The weft yarn that I used in here was the same one as this one. This is also merino silk lace for weft. And so yes, it makes this very drippy kind of fabric. But I think that my warp yarn was my handspun yarn. I thought it was fingering weight, but in fact, it was probably a little bit less than fingering weight. And so I feel like this fabric was a little bit more sleazy or not as structurally sound as the other ones. And so you could see here, there is a finger poking through that one. So that is one where I would have liked to go up in terms of set, just increase the set, make it like a little bit more dense, put those warp threads a little bit closer together so that it would provide more structure. So that is basically what happened in this last scarf. This one was woven by Charlotte last month as part of the Secret Stash Club. So this colorway was called Lizzie Line, and this is the November Club colorway for our Secret Stash Club for Sweet Georgia. And so she used, again, a finer fingering weight. It's like a lighter fingering weight yarn. This is our mohair silk sock yarn. And she used that as warp. And so rather than going with 12 ends per inch, we decided to use 15 ends per inch, which is a new reed that Shacked basically just released. And so we used the 15 dent reed for fingering weight yarn. And again, it's still very, very drippy soft because she used a weft yarn that is 20/2 silk. So it's a fine, pure silk lace weight yarn. And that's what gives it that sort of drippy kind of drapey quality. This is beautiful, buttery soft yarn. And so for this one, she said it was 150 ends, 15 ends per inch in the reed, and she wove it with that 20/2 silk to make that scarf. So you can see how it is like a little bit warp-faced in here. Now, we did one, we're kind of pushed to the extreme, where this one was from a course that we called Faux ECAT. And so the idea was that we were weaving these scarves and trying to realign the colors of a hand-painted skein to make like blocks and blocks of color. So this is one of the projects that we wove as part of that. And so this one, because we were trying to emphasize the warp and the colors in the warp, we set it even closer. So this one is actually 20 ends per inch. So you can see here, it is still, pretty soft, still got lots of drape. This is still plain weave. And for weft, we used a very, very fine silk mohair lace weight yarn. So this is our silk mist yarn. And so that silk mist with the fuzzy mohair kind of helps to bind everything together and still produce kind of a very fuzzy but soft and drapey kind of scarf. So anywhere from 10 ends per inch all the way to 20 ends per inch. I would not do 20 ends per inch for the fingering weight yarn and then try to beat it at 20 picks per inch. That would make a really, really firm, tight kind of fabric. The only reason why this works is because we're doing sort of like an increased increased density of yarns in the warp, but using a much, much finer weft yarn. And then again, these ones are the latest scarves that I've made, and these ones are not plain weave. So these ones were also set at 20 ends per inch, but they are woven in twill. And so this is same warp yarn. This one happens to be in plain weave at 15 ends per inch, and this one is in a twill at 20 ends per inch. So at the end of the day, if you're trying to decide what set to use or what reed to use, really you have to ask yourself, what kind of fabric do you want to make? What kind of yarn are you using for warp? How dense or how firm do you want your fabric to be, or do you want it to be slinky and drapey? What kind of weft yarn are you going to use? How firmly are you going to beat that weft yarn? So all of these questions could be answered if you just do a little bit of sampling to see how you like the fabric. And sampling would mean that you would dress your loom at the set that you're wanting. Then you weave, a few good inches of the fabric that you want in the weft yarn that you want at the picks per inch that you want. And then I would cut it off the loom, wash it, and then see how it behaves. And then if you like that fabric, then go ahead and do an entire project with that sort of setup. Or if you need to make adjustments and you need to reslay your reed, you can do that. If you need to change your picks per inch and like beat a little bit looser, a little bit tighter, whatever you need to do, change your weft yarn. All of this can be answered if you do a little bit of sampling at the start. And so for me, I know I have made a number of scarves, all with the same kind of warp yarn or same type of warp yarn, but each time I'm taking it off the loom, feeling it. Do I like this? Do I want to make some changes? What will I do for the next scarf? And so I'm okay that I have, a whole bunch of scarves where some are a little bit more firm, some are a little bit more drapey, slinky, however they are. But all of these scarves become experience for the next projects and the next projects and beyond. So to go back to the first question about can I use a 10-dent reed for my kaleidoscope scarf, you absolutely could. You definitely could, depending on what the yarn is, but it will produce a fabric that is going to be a little bit looser, maybe a little bit more open, maybe a little bit more drapey than you expected. So ultimately, it just depends on what kind of fabric you want to make at the end of the day. So that is basically it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you like these videos and you want to learn more about weaving, then I do encourage you to subscribe to this channel. You can hit the bell for notifications for anytime there are uploads to this channel. And you can also come join us in the School of SweetGeorgia, where we are teaching how to weave from the very beginning, working with rigid heddle looms, multi-shaft looms from the very start. You can find us there. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. All right, bye for now.